Each Sunday, I'm reading a chapter from Sacred Hellos, Messages from Heaven, my book all about grief and loss. As I'm rereading these chapters, it is amazing to me how relevant these lessons are. As I'm selling everything and getting ready to move abroad, they're relevant for that and making that life change. And they're also so relevant for all of the chaos that's happening in America and dealing with stress, this time of uncertainty. So many of these stories and tools are the same. I'm so glad you're here for this next chapter of Sacred Hellos. The time my mom interfered with her own funeral. My family and I were together around the clock the week following my mom's death. In this bubble of non-judgment, we were able to jump between sharing memories, anger over her passing, and then flow into the current day's happenings. It was a sacred space for us. A few days after her passing, we were sitting in the basement of my parents' house. There was a small octagon room under the entryway of the house. The ceiling beams were low, so you had to crouch down to walk in there, and my dad had put counters around half the room and converted this area into a sound mixing room for his music and his band. It was in this basement sound room we sat picking out music for my mom's funeral. My dad found audio from the 1970s and put it on the double reel player. A small group of us listened in silence as my mother's singing voice filled the room. The words started, "He is now to be among you at the calling of your hearts." It was "There Is Love" by Noel Paul Stookey. I had never heard my mom sing. My parents had met in the 1970s while my mom was a backup singer and my dad was a guitarist. They shared a love of music. While raising 5 kids, she gave that up. And I could only slightly remember hearing her voice at church. As we continued listening, we all knew having her voice singing at her funeral was exactly what we needed. We talked about how my mom would never have allowed us to publicly play a recording of her singing if she were here. Not that she didn't think she was a good singer. She grew more modest the older she got. And we jokingly said, "Well, she can't stop us now." A weight was lifted as much needed laughter filled the space. It felt so good to laugh. It felt so good to think of my mom as a human with emotions, talents, and vulnerabilities instead of this unfazed, untouchable angel. Later that week, we brought the music to the funeral home. We tested to make sure everything worked and the volume was perfect. As my mom's celebration of life service was underway, everything was going as planned. I sat with Bruce and my siblings and our kids. Our father, his parents, and my mom's mom all sat together in front of us. I held the program in my hand, trying not to curl it up. I was trying to still process what I was going through. 20 minutes earlier, knowing the visitation was wrapping up, I made my way up to my mom's casket. I knew they were beginning to usher us into the family room so that they could close the casket and begin the service. I stared at my mom's face, memorizing and studying every feature. Her hands, her rings. I could not leave her. My legs would not move. I could not process that this was the last time that my body would be next to hers. I reached over and I kissed her forehead, trying to lock in this image for me to revisit when needed later. While I know intellectually that her soul was no longer in that body, these were the arms that held me so many times in my life. The face that brought me comfort and love. I had not been prepared for this moment. And leaving her there, it felt as if my heart was being ripped from my body as I tried to rise up in that moment. I worked to regain control of my deep sobs. Slowly, I took a breath and I turned around. Walking away from my mom was the hardest single thing I've ever done. In my life. Later, as the service progressed and I noticed her song was about to begin, the silence stretched out. We waited to hear her beautiful voice again. I wanted my grandma to hear her daughter again. I wanted my friends and our relatives to feel her energy through the music. Only this time, the music did not play. I could tell people were getting nervous. Like, what was happening? The silence just kept stretching out. The seconds continued to tick by. And I looked down at my family and I said, she did have the last say, didn't she? And with that, we all burst out laughing. It actually felt so good to sit in the awkwardness of the silence and feel her presence around us. Eventually, the music did come on. It was discovered that an outlet had been shut off somewhere. To us, we knew exactly what had happened. My mom showed up to reclaim her voice at her celebration of life ceremony. And she came to remind us there is love. I'll show the illustrations from this chapter. This picture is actually slightly digitally altered from a mural that I had painted on my mom's wall. My parents' wall, but it was for my mom in their living room. Actually, looking at this right now, this feels extra special since we're getting ready to travel, and this was inspired by Italian landscape. So 17 years later, reading that, I can still, it's amazing how you can be right back in that moment. I actually took photos of my mom in her casket before the ceremony started. And I've since deleted them, and I regret that I deleted them. I had photos of her hands with her rings on, which I now wear one of those rings. And actually of her face too. In the end, she was very swollen and had a lot of puffiness and didn't look as much like herself in the last couple of years. And she looked more like the mom that I knew actually in the casket than she had in real life the last few years. And the first few years I looked at the photo of her laying there dozens of times. And I'm not saying it's for everybody, and people probably have really strong feelings about this. They may be horrified that I did that. I would have probably judged somebody about it too. So, but I will say that for me, sitting and getting a look at that occasionally over the next few years helped it sink in that had happened. It helped my brain understand it. It was my mom, but it wasn't my mom. And something about seeing a body, if you've ever been with someone who's passed, there is a difference when that energy about them is no longer there. It's still them, but it's different. And I think my brain, seeing that over and over, it helped me process that. Yeah, I kind of regret not having that still. I didn't want my kids to see it, but she looked beautiful. And, she had a beautiful red dress on. And what's interesting is she actually had a black dress on. For her programs, we used a photo of her in red. And for all these years, I've remembered her in red. And I'm right now, after not seeing those photos for years, just realizing she was in black. Soft black velvet dress. It's so interesting. The song we played during her ceremony was Lady in Red. And I think I've had that locked in my head and kind of rewritten that part. So it's so interesting that just occurred to me right now. Grief is a fascinating journey that I do think makes us a more well-rounded person, and yet you hope that you never go through it and you don't wish it on anyone else. It's interesting. I thank you. I keep hitting my mic. I'll try to stop. I thank you for being here and listening each Sunday as I read chapters out of this book. I poured my heart into this book, and so I hope you'll join me next Sunday as well, or go back and listen to the past chapters. Is a book that different chapters stick out to me each time of my life. And sometimes I look back and I think, how did I write that? It was like an out-of-body experience where those words came from. I'm really grateful that I journaled through the process and kept track of those thoughts so that I could articulately in some way connect them. And hopefully they can be helpful to you in some way. If you have anything you'd add to that, or you have a story of your own, I would love to hear it in the comments. And if anyone does share their story in the comments, please be supportive or encouraging to them. This is such a vulnerable topic. And I honor you. And I appreciate you being here and supporting me through it as well. Even 17 years out, it's interesting how it continues to evolve. And I think I feel this extra layer of, I don't know if vulnerability is the right word, but as we are changing our entire lives and we are moving, and I'm leaving all my possessions behind and getting rid of them, and just a very, one or two pieces of luggage that we'll have that we'll later collect when we figure out where we want to be, worth of mementos from a lifetime. And I don't feel bad about that whatsoever, but I am aware that does open up things as you're saying goodbye to things and going back through and taking inventory of a life. This book is available on Amazon. I'll put the link in the description if you're interested. It's in paperback or in Kindle version. Mine's a little beat up from reading it so many times, but yeah. It makes a great gift for someone who's about a year plus out from grief. I wouldn't recommend it for someone who's in the thick of it. As you can see, 17 years out, and that still can lock me into that moment. But it can make a great gift or for yourself as well. It's an uplifting book, even though there's very real topics in it. Thank you for being here. I wish you all the best, and I hope you have a good day. Bye.